All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing what we talked about and what we started talking about last time, which is the engagement and its rulings. And inshallah, that's what we're going to be covering today. So allow me to just make sure that I share the screen with you to, be fair. So right now, let me just make it a big screen so you could see it. Okay, here we go. So there we go. So last time, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, we actually talked about qualification and engagement, and I told you that all the slides are available on that aishawazwas.wordpress.com. So it's easy for you to get access to all these slides, and plus someone actually stole them and put them on a website. It's called Archive PDF or something like that, and they stole them as is, but that's okay. And yeah, so you will be finding it right there, not hard to find. Okay, we talked about some of the qualifications in engagement. We talked about Islam, and we said Islam in terms of a woman, she could only be engaged to a Muslim man. And the opposite, we are going to go in more details in that regards, but just wanted to mention that a Muslim man can marry a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jewish woman, and we went in details in regards to the evidences. But one thing I didn't talk about the wisdom behind it, and some scholars did mention some of the, let's call it the wisdoms around it, but not the illah. Let me explain the word illah and wisdom, okay? So when we say wisdom behind it, it is something that we can, let's say, get an inspiration from. We can put some of our experiences, some of what we would know, what we can, let's say, distract, or probably what we can get from the wisdoms within that. But not having a certain wisdom there does not necessarily mean that that changes the ruling. Let me explain that further. Let's say that the scholars had mentioned part of those wisdoms is that women are more compromising, and women tend to basically maybe be pressured to give up on their religion, or probably give up on their values, or give up on whatever it is by probably telling them, well, if you don't become this religion, you don't give up on this right or that right, that she may end up basically being pressured by telling her, if you don't do this, then I'm going to be taking away your children, etc. Let's just say she said, hey, this isn't going to happen. And this person, hey, we're living in America, and women have their right for freedom of faith, and women can actually get, child custody. We agreed on that. We did a prenup, and we agreed, even in case of divorce, how the child support and child custody and everything would look like, etc. So can I now, since I guaranteed that my religion is not going to be at risk, and that he will not force me into any of that, can I get married to a Christian man, since we had made all the different regulations to make sure that this isn't a risk anymore? I would say, wait a minute, that wasn't the illah, but that was the hikmah. The hikmah was that just because you managed to perhaps maybe ensure what you thought was a hikmah, that's not the only thing. Okay, so therefore, we can get some of those wisdoms, but just because you had thought that you did a prenup or you had done all of that, that's not the main reason. The main reason is that this is ibadah, that this is worship, and not necessarily something that Islam itself told us the reasoning why. we don't have the actual reason explained why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, لا هن حل لهم ولا هم يحلون لهن. He didn't give us the exact reason to why, and therefore we would just say, well, we would do this in this matter to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a form of ibadah. So regardless of what wisdoms that may be surrounding this look like, it's a ibadah. It's a worship, it's a legislation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I can give you some of those wisdoms. You can probably share wisdoms, maybe tell me some things that you know about women's psychology or about women's physiology or women's, I don't know, I guess what you probably are seeing at court or whatever. You can share some of your wisdoms in there and say, this is what I could say. This is through our studies. This is what we could find very interesting, but that doesn't make it the reason. Okay, that doesn't make it the reason. So it pretty much would be something that you can get at least the inspiration from, but that does not necessarily answer the question and say, this is the reason why, therefore, if we were to change this one, then that would change the ruling. Okay, that does not make it the case, because this would be something that is thawabit. That would be something that will never change, and we cannot change it and say, well, we can add this, we can modify this and make it in any way something that is emptied of the ruling. Okay, so just wanted to make sure that we understand this one. Okay, and we did talk about encouraging to marry with different qualities, but the Prophet ﷺ was, of course, recommending piety for both men and women. We're going to go further in talking about women choosing pious men, but we did say, and we emphasized on that one, we said having these qualities does not guarantee a successful marriage, but is a main ingredient to making a successful marriage. So we talked about level of education and how important it is. But of course, I'm just, going over these really quick, but I don't want to go in so much detail because I don't want to make this a psychology class or make this, I would say, like, those other classes that perhaps other people can do a better job than me. You could have a lot of TED Talks and a lot of different experts talk about these things in thorough detail and very good evidence and statistics and all of that. I don't want to get into that, but I'll just say that Islam will also embrace these differences in these factors as certainly important factors that may affect a marriage. That's all I'm trying to say. You can go in a lot of these different experts that can do a way better job in explaining how important these factors and how important these things are in making a compatible relationship. So I don't want to go in all of these details. There are so many experts that can talk about it, but I just want you to know that Islam will take this as in consideration and as a way to make a compatible relationship, more successful marriage, etc. So even if it is not included in the hadith and you wanted to say, well, yes, this person is good akhlaq, this person's good deen, but his level of education is not even near, etc. But at the same time, I would want to say, don't get too carried away with a lot of these utopian lectures that sometimes they get so much into theory, sucked into theory, and say, well, the level of education, you either marry somebody that is higher than your education or you don't, or etc. I'll tell you, just keep in mind, don't necessarily get sucked into this level of education in this pragmatic way, because just by having a certain level of education does not prove understanding. Just keep that one in mind, because so many times we get so sucked in this pragmatic type of classification that without us realizing, we're just going so much into these types of classifications, and they don't necessarily resemble a person's success, a person's understanding, a person's personality, etc. It doesn't necessarily resemble all of that. Being book smart is not necessarily being social smart, and is not necessarily being, let's say, successful in knowing how to get to successes in life under this roof, in that relationship, whether it's within your own house, within your own family, etc., within your bedroom, etc. All of that, what really matters is how all of these things, how all these ingredients, considering them that, they blend within that human being. You want to keep in mind that from one person to another, it blends in a completely different way. And as a person that used to do matchmaking for almost 12 years, I'll tell you, you can have a profile of somebody that has this degree, a person that has this type of job, a person that has, this kind of personality, whatever, and a person that is in this appearance, but then the marriage doesn't work out, which really tells us a lot when you look into, well, why didn't it work out? There could be a number of different reasons, but the most important reason that I would like to point is that human beings are a lot more complex than putting in a couple factors and a couple ingredients and thinking that they should play out in this way. Just remember that. Human beings are a lot more complex. And I said this last time, they're a lot more complex than all the different matter that you would see in the universe, and all the different things that you would study in physics and biology and chemistry, whatever it is. They're actually at a fixed number, there's a fixed thing that you could study, but in human beings, it's not fixed. And from one person to another, it plays out a completely different thing. Yes, we do have statistics that, hey, if this person, let's say, comes from this kind of social status or whatever, they are more likely to be in this way, etc. But that does not necessarily guarantee. You just have to keep remembering that human beings are a lot more complex than the ingredients that you may look at a profile and say, okay, looking at the profile, this is what I see about this person. Okay, because I'll tell you, a lot of the narcissists are actually some of the most successful people, some of the most probably rich ones. They're doctors, they're probably politicians, they're really successful. They're con artists. They just know how to play with their words. They know how to catch their praise. They know exactly. They know how to catch their praise. They know how to find their victims, or at least the people that are going to be their future victims. So it's so easy to get lost in, is this person a really successful person? Is this person dedicated? Or is this person really using those successful roles, those successful positions to get away and find different ways to control, be authoritative, play games, be con artists, or whatever it is. So we really have to be careful in how we study, in how we connect all of these different ingredients and think that, okay, if this person is this person is that, then this is what we're going to make out of all of this. Okay. And I want you to just keep that in mind. Just because a person is a sheikh on a pulpit does not mean he's really going to have taqwa. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Doesn't mean he's going to have taqwa. He could be the most selfish person. He could be the person that is a completely different person at home. And on the pulpit, he looks like an angel. At home, he's a devil. So you really want to be careful. Don't necessarily think that if you see a sheikh, that means he's going to be the taqi, or you see this person that is educated, that means he's going to be understanding, or you see this person coming from a certain culture, oh, that means this person is backwards, or that means this person is advanced, etc. No, I don't want to go into all these stereotypical images, but trust me, I was so astonished to see Doc being violent, and I really mean violent. I was astonished to see people that are professors being the most narrow-minded, the most backward thinking. I was also astonished to see some people from, that may be portrayed as the ones that are coming from an advanced, civilized culture, but end up being really the most phonetic, really being the most closed-minded. And you would think that this person is a person of open-mindedness, etc. But think not too fast. You'll be really surprised at how things would, the stereotypical images of certain positions, of certain factors, of certain, things on the profile. It basically on the profile it looks just very attractive, but then when you live with that person, it plays out in a completely different ingredient. And that's why I would always recommend put your wali on board. Your wali, and men especially, they're capable of picking on men and realizing things on men faster than us as women. We tend to be very emotional, and certainly, I'll tell you, during my feminist days, just describing women as emotional was something that I absolutely hated. I understand how many women would feel when they would hear somebody describing women as emotional. It would feel so offensive, and it would provoke so many different angers. I completely understand, because that's what it used to do to me when I was, let's say, all right, influenced by all that feminist rhetoric. I understand how you feel when you hear that. When you look into theory and you see, why are people using this against women, that they're emotional, etc. But I'll tell you right now, we're seeing science really back up those, let's call them, at one point, they were anecdotal. So you would see in the books of fiqh, in the books of tafsir, that they would emphasize women's emotional character, women being more susceptible to judging based on their emotions, etc. We used to see that as anecdotal and something that the scholars or their experiences or their stereotypical images that they carried within that particular culture, etc. We used to see it that way, but right now we're seeing neuroscience back this up. We're seeing psychology studies actually telling us, well, guess what? It is actually true. And it is backed up right now by even brain scans that show us how women's brains really function, how they read and analyze the different things that are around them. So yes, dear, we may have certain emotional intelligence, but when it comes to guys, they basically have, let's just call it, better emotional intelligence in picking up danger, in picking up certain signals, to recognize danger, to anticipate fake behaviors, fake emotions, or etc. But women, they tend to look for a place of security, so she will fall in the words that this giving her, making her feel like she's going to be the queen. She's going to be basically with this person that's going to make her feel so happy. He's going to give her the security, etc. And they know how to play the game. So please, get your wali involved, and it's not just one wali. I would say the family involved in order to help you make the right decision. Do not make your own decisions behind your family's back, because guess what? That's exactly what a lot of these predators want. A lot of these predators, what they're looking for is you being alone so they could just, put claws on you and just get you alone with no one with you to protect you. So please get your wali on board. I know how some of you might say, well, my wali is too authoritative, he's too this, he's too that. I would say we're going to get to where the wali's role ends and where it begins, and what if they are being really too authoritative and not necessarily fair in their judgment. That can happen. We're going to get in details with that, but right now I'll just say as a default advice or a default ruling as well, I would say please get your wali on board, because subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it for a hikmah to say that wali is to be on board in order to give you protection. He knows what he had equipped the men in their brains, in their hearts, in their bodies, etc., to help basically be the ones to be giving you the backup. So please include your wali. All right. And again, this is not to be offensive. I'm a woman like you. Absolutely understand how you feel when somebody calls you emotional, and certainly sometimes they may use it as a way to be condescending and disrespectful. Completely understand. Sometimes indeed that may be used within that context, but I don't not mean it whatsoever in a context of being offensive whatsoever, because if that was the case, I would have been offensive on myself as well. I'm not trying to be condescending, absolutely not, because it doesn't make sense me being condescending over myself. I'm just here trying to lay out certain realities that basically are things that we may not be capable of seeing, let's call it, at least in certain dynamics, but we kind of need some, let's call it, eyes that scan through the skull and scan through the social dynamics and kind of scan in different ways. And certainly we're not going to be scanning this brain and that brain each and every single time we get into a disagreement and say, what did they really emotions? Did they really use their, fact-based evidence, or what did they really use? We're not going to be doing that, but we will just recognize that there are certain statistics and there are certain studies that do back up the reality that how we as women or may analyze things, may interpret things, that how a lot of the different data, the different resources, the different interpretations, the different, let's say, the way that they might anticipate, let's say 10 years from now, 5 years from now, doesn't make every single wali being right. No, wali can go wrong. And I had seen that very many times. I'm not saying they'll always be right, but I will say, hey, use those aiding tools that Islam is recommending for you, which basically is the wali, in order to keep you on the safe side. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ encouraged certain qualifications. I want you to look at this one. When we say the Prophet ﷺ encouraged certain qualifications, this is important because we, at the end of the day, we definitely recognize that studies will us perhaps just like before about personality, culture, etc., all of these different things. They'll tell us, or we've got all these books that that speak about this. So I don't want to get into this one, but let's see what Islam says. So the Prophet ﷺ recommended to the guys, he said, ما استفاد المؤمن بعد تقوى الله خيرا من زوجة صالحة إن أمرها أطاعت وإن نظر إليه سرت وإن أقسم عليها أبرت وإن غاب عنها نصحته في نفسها وماله. The Prophet ﷺ said, the best benefit for a believer after piety So that basically means he's saying, well, the best thing and the most important thing you could do is basically piety. Holding on to your deen is the most important thing. But the best thing in your life is basically the best benefit is a pious wife. Okay, what is a pious wife? Well, this isn't telling the guys, hey, you need a pious wife, a woman that is pious, a woman that is religious, etc. But, well, what is that? So that's what we as women, how can I become a pious wife? He said, if he orders her, she obeys him. Wait a minute. Did you just say obey, like obey? I thought obedience is only to slaves. No, obedience is not only to slaves, because remember, you obey traffic laws, don't you? Are you a slave when you obey traffic laws? No, you're not, because you recognize that when you obey traffic laws, that traffic laws were basically there in order to keep you safer, to keep others safer, etc. So you recognize, you still use the word obey. You at work will obey the policies that your employer basically told you that, 1, 2, 3, we don't want you to use the phone, or we probably don't want you to do this, or this is what you need to wear, this is what you need to this is what you need to do to come in. You scan your card, you leave, you scan your card, you put in your hours. If this, you cannot turn off this camera, they'll put all these different rules, and this is when your lunchtime is, you can't do that, you obey those laws. Do you consider yourself a slave? No. But let me talk about the word obey the husband, and how that later started becoming as if it carries the connotation of a slave, and that really started with the feminist agenda. I do a whole lecture, if you put scrutinizing feminism on YouTube, and you can find a whole list and a whole lecture really of all those different lists of what the feminist ideology is really carrying, and how it infiltrated the Muslim mind and Muslim women, and even many that are called sheikhs right now are really infiltrated with this feminist ideology and think that they're doing Islam a favor. Anyhow, that's a different story. But when you look at the connotation of obeying the husband, and when it became a connotation of slavery, well, that really started out with the whole idea of feminism, because feminism viewed that marriage in itself, childbearing, and the whole centricity about women and centricity about and childbearing, they viewed it as that's what is distracting, or that's what is regressing women or obstructing women from being equal to men. What did they mean by equal to men? Well, they meant by equal to men, equal in financial opportunities, economical advantages, economical basically opportunities. So they considered, well, what's making a woman not get the same financial privileges? Well, it's basically she's busy with the children, she's busy at home, and she's basically connected to her husband. So in order to free her, that is quote unquote, free her from all these obstacles that are making her so let's say distracted, and also keeping her away from getting those privileges, it's basically family. So then therefore we could, of course, feminism regarded that marriage is nothing but a cage, that marriage is nothing but a cage for women, and that who's basically the doorkeeper for this cage, it's basically the husband, and considered that own obstacle to her own success. So then, of course, you had someone like Marriage de Beauvoir, who is considered the godfather of feminism. She actually wrote books and books about how husbands are basically the doorkeepers of the cage, and how marriage is basically the biggest obstacle in a woman's life, and motherhood is basically this area that is keeping women from success, and all of these different things. So Islam comes in and tells you, well, actually, marriage is area to give you the comfort, is the area to give you this, that bond, is basically the area to secure your rights in order to keep you away from all those different predators out there that are wanting to use you as easy access to their own lust. So Islam comes in and says, well, wait a minute, you basically are this area that continues life on earth. Man needs a woman needs a man, just like you need him for, of course, for your children and for reproduction, to basically help you preserve the babies, keep the babies, etc. That's part of your nature. And that's why you would look for a man that is more educated than you, that is more powerful, that you see in him six-pack power, you see in him resembles basically strength. That's what a woman is looking for. A woman is looking for someone that is resembling strength, resembling power, because it is part of her nature that she's seeking something that would secure her babies. It's part of her nature that she recognizes certain weaknesses of hers. So she's looking for something to empower basically her own role within nature. Okay, so we see that in nature, not only in human beings, but we see that in animals as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, وَإِن مِّن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُم. Go ahead, Humaira. Go ahead, dear.
Sheikha, I wanted to ask, so does the man also look the same for the woman, for her to be more knowledgeable than him?
No, a man doesn't necessarily look for a woman to be more knowledgeable. A man basically wants to feel his manhood. And when we say wants to feel his manhood, he wants to basically feel that he's capable of doing challenges. That's why if you look at, I'm not necessarily the expert on this, but you could go to a number of different experts on YouTube that will tell you the difference between a male mind and a female mind. So I'll just make the story short. And there are a lot of great podcasts that actually speak about, look at the experts. Don't look at the ones that have an agenda, but the experts that talk about this. Anyhow, I'll make the story short. So boys' brains, they look for challenges. That's why you would see boys liking gaming, for example, or looking for a challenge. Okay, and they look for a challenge, they like rewards, they look at this, but girls look for something that is probably social media, something that makes her feel good about herself, looks for something that is a rewarding in a different way. But for boys, no, they look for a challenge because they want to feel their masculinity. They want to feel their power. They want to feel that they managed to overcome challenge, overcome something that basically helps them recognize that they are of strength. So a man's brains work completely, in a completely different way, even from early childhood. You see what boys want. They'll be jumping over cliffs. They'll be challenging. They'll be risky. They'll be doing all these different risky things. But for women, we like to stay safe. We don't want to go for risky things. That doesn't mean that if a girl wants to do risky things, that makes her boy, having boy traits, and therefore, you are probably needing to transition into a boy. All of that, of course not. Okay, Islam's completely against that. But we're saying that, there's a general study in what boys are looking for. So boys would be looking to give security. Boys would be looking to figure out certain challenging ways in order to solve problems. So they're problem solvers. They're looking for areas to ensure power, to ensure their masculinity, etc. So we'll talk about that later, inshallah. But at the time, what boys also look for is in terms of different things in nature. Certainly, they're looking for something that would show a sign of a certain family of woman traits. But you want to keep in mind one thing. A woman and her connection to her reproductive system is completely different than a man and his connection to reproductive system. There's a huge difference. A woman's in her connection with reproductive system, she's looking for power, etc. But a man in his connection with a reproductive system is not necessarily connected with their social dynamic. Let me explain. For a man, they're looking for something that is attractive, sexually, etc., that that is an area for making basically that relationship, that intimacy. But that doesn't mean that he's looking for that necessarily in terms of wife. You would see men that are promiscuous, but then when it comes to marriage, he'll say, well, this is what I'm looking for in a marriage. He will probably mate with that woman that is promiscuous. But when it comes to marriage, he's like, I will not marry that woman. They know exactly what they want. They know exactly what they want. I will not marry that woman. But as women, we cannot mate with men that we're not comfortable with. It's part of our nature. It's part of our nature that before we get into this whole mating, that we have to feel that this man is capable of giving me security, is capable of carrying my babies and securing my babies and securing the family. So that's why we are built differently. Our whole reproductive system is built with our emotions. If a woman is sad, she's not feeling well, she not be ready for a meeting. But if a man who's angry, etc., it's completely different. Doesn't mean that he's ready for a meeting, but it's completely different. Completely different. He can mate with someone that he hates or doesn't even know, was an enemy, rape. But that's not the case for a woman. Certainly if he's not. Anyhow, don't want to go into all these details, but you can actually see a lot of these different great podcasts right now that are available, and you got to be really patient in, Daniel Amen. I really enjoy listening to his podcasts. Daniel Amen, he's a psychiatrist, and plus he made all these brain scans, and he will tell you a lot about the brain scans, a lot about women, men, etc. I absolutely enjoy his. I'll get you some of those names out there that did an outstanding job, and I'll put them out there. They're real experts in human psychology and also brain scans and neuroscience as well, because a lot of those departments, I would say, were hijacked by some of the agendas, but some experts, they don't fall for agendas. They will say the fact and they will say the study, and they recognize when there is a piece of information that is let's say infiltrated within that department, or that that's not what experts and that's not what studies will say. There are those experts, that will be, I would say, given these agendas, and they become mouthpieces to those agendas. There are experts they're completely refusing to be mouthpieces for certain groups, you know what I mean, LGBT and the feminists and etc. And there are certain experts that are really having the integrity, and they will tell you, this is what we're finding in this is what we are seeing in brain scans. This is what the statistics are saying. This is the interpretation. And they will really sift these pieces from those different agendas. And some people have the integrity to tell you, all of that is all of that is crap. We're going to throw it out of the window. We know very well that that was an agenda. And other people, they are just these consumers. They just want to get the degree and they become the mouthpiece for certain agendas. Those people, do not listen to them. And not because somebody is labeled as an expert, that doesn't necessarily make that person as an expert. So you really got to be wise and smart and educated to know who is who, and this is extremely important. And I'll give you one lens that you use to help you identify these experts, quote unquote, because I'll just use that as to what sometimes they could be labeled as. One thing, use the lens, and so if somebody is giving you information that matches and goes in congruence with the Quran and Sunnah, then you can guarantee that this data is going at least the right direction. The interpretation is going the right direction. But if this person is being an against to what Islam really teaches, you can right there just be sure that no, there's some either missing data or the interpretation gone wrong. It doesn't necessarily have to be agenda-based, but it can be missing data, reading data wrong, something is not right. You want to use the Quran and Sunnah and all the different details that you would know about Islam to make sure you are reading things right, okay? And you are understanding something right, okay? So just use that one. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, when he says she obeys him, that's where we left off at, obeys him to mean that in khair. Remember, إنما الطاعة بالمعروف. Ta'a is, what is bil ma'ruf? Bil ma'ruf is actually two things. One, to obey him on good terms. In other words, good things. So if he obeys you in something that is haram, well, you're going to say, sorry, but that's against the religion. I'm not going to submit to that. I'm not going to obey you in that. Okay. Number two is bil ma'ruf also means in something that is known within that culture, that this is something that is known, that this is your duty, this is his role, etc. within that culture. What if it is known within that culture, but it is beyond my capacity? It's not within my ability to do that, or I do not want to do that. Then that's an area of discussion, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are asking you to necessarily obey and submit to that. If there's an area of discussion, you say, well, here's why. Let's give an example. Okay. Give an example. Let's say he orders you that you cannot drive. Okay. And he says, I know you have your license, but I don't want you to ever drive anymore. I'm a jealous man. I don't want you to drive. I'll be your driver. Okay, let's just say it that way. Okay, and you say, well, wait a minute, we didn't agree on that from the beginning. So right now we're married, and you already know that I was driving. You already know I have my driver's license. And right now you all of a sudden developed a jealousy feeling, and you're asking me not to drive. So he'll say, well, yeah, right now we live in Saudi Arabia, and it's seen as bad for you to drive. And you say, well, guess what? The laws changed. MBS changed the law, and right now we can drive. And he said, well, yeah, although, yes, the law says that, but you know very well that still the culture not fully adapted to this new law of modernization or whatever it is. And I don't want these men talking about my wife driving and all of that. Okay. Now, here's one thing. I see, that he is basically coming from with it, living in that culture, where and what is really happening there. And okay, is it necessarily haram? The answer is no, it's not haram for you to drive, but then we'll go into how can we understand that there is a new culture that we're living in, and what can we do about it? But in general, it certainly is not haram. And then we will come in to perhaps bring in an explanation. Let me explain one thing. Most conversations that happen between the husband and the wife are not necessarily directed at, let's say, the driving, or perhaps they're angry at a towel, or, all of that. Most of these disagreements are actually a disagreement over authority, over care, over honor, over recognition. What do I mean by that? So let's say he's saying, well, I don't want you to drive. Then we would have to see, is he just trying to be authoritative? Or is this not an issue of trying to be authoritative, but it's more of an issue that, hey, people are right there talking about us. These people are really backward minded. They're really traditional people. And I don't want your reputation basically be at the, people's topic and people's number one hot topic that they're talking about you. You got to understand these people are still really traditional, really backward. I don't want people talking about you. Okay, so now the whole conversation is kind of shifting towards a different end. So what I am trying to do here, I'm trying to explain that sometimes when we're speaking about obedience, sometimes the question is not to be in authority as much as it is, well, I'm trying to maintain your respect. Okay. I said most of those disagreements between the husband and the wife is an issue of authority, is of care, is an issue of respect and honor. So I want you to look at those, because she is seeing it as, oh, you're being authoritative. He is seeing it, well, no, I'm just trying to give you, I don't want people to get, those guys or those people speaking about you. They're still, fixated on that traditional mindset of theirs. I don't want people talking about you, because it really offends me to hear anybody disrespecting you. For example, that changes the conversation. So when we say obeying the husband, I would say, I want you to get into that. Most of the times that women will have this sensitivity towards the word obey, because they will feel that what the man is doing is just trying to be authoritative. In other words, trying to minimize any right, or trying to minimize basically her personality, that she is of no respect. Then in that situation, I'll tell you, Islam, that's not what Islam intended. Islam absolutely did not want women to be of no dignity, of no right, of no honor whatsoever. Islam, that's not the main thing about that's not the main thing that you would find about obedience. But the main thing about obedience in Islam is to make structure. That's the whole object of obedience in the religion, or at least within the household, is to make structure. So if we look at structure as the key thing, then we will say, okay, I can understand that there needs to be structure, and therefore, even if I disagree as a wife, I have the right to disagree, at least in opinion. I disagree that, for example, you want certain things to be in a certain way. I disagree. Here's what I think where you are wrong or right about this. This is why, I have the right to at least voice my disagreement, voice my opinions, voice my evidences. This is not called disobedience. And here's one thing, is that some men in some cultures, they may consider that that's a form of disobedience and disrespect. You have the right to voice, even if you are against at least his opinion. But at the end, in order to maintain structure, you would have to say, you know what, here's why, this is why I disagree with you on this idea. and here are my evidence, etc. And he said, okay, well, here's why you are wrong on this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's say you say, well, I still have a response to this. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4 response to your 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this goes on and on, and they get into argument. What I would say is that in order to make sure that this doesn't become a very personalized and a very me type of thing, I would always recommend, before you get into any heated argument, once the argument is starting to get heated, pull out. It isn't an argument anymore. It had become too personal. Now we're starting to attack each other personally. If it's a heated argument, just learn how to pull out. We'll talk about this later. This is extremely important. It's a tactic to save each other's honors, to save each other from feeling that it's a personalized thing, because he's then feeling that, oh, you're disrespecting me, and he's also going to disrespect you in return. And then guess what? Those ugly moments that we disrespect each other, we think that, yeah, we disrespected each other. I can probably later on say, hey, I love you, I'm sorry, etc. But guess what? The scar is I'm still bleeding. You probably put a tape over it, but the scar is still there, and I'm still right there. I'm still thinking about it. And that's why when we talk about respect, once that heated argument starts to happen, pull out, because he's going to feel his manhood is being attacked, and you as a woman will later on not forget when he starts attacking back the boy way. The boy way is a violent, and you as a woman cannot handle these violent ways. I don't mean by physically violent, but I would also mean in very hurtful comments that you as a woman cannot handle. You as a woman cannot handle. I mean, neither can he, but they can get over it way faster than how we can get over it. A word will always be there. And guess what? Those words of hurtful comments, they come at the most sensitive times. And you know what I mean. They'll come at the most sensitive time, and that's when she'll turn off, and you know what I mean. And that's why it's really important to learn. I don't want to call, this a battlefield. It's not a battlefield. We need to make sure that we understand how to compromise and how to create a conversation, not a confrontation. Once it becomes a confrontation, this is a battlefield. Once it becomes a battlefield, then each one is going to use their most ugly ammunitions, whether it was a verbal one, or whether it was to put down, or whether it's probably to maybe sometimes even go far in practice. We definitely need to be wise in how we create communication. Once the person's not even understanding your words, it's not a dialogue anymore. It's a monologue. They're just listening to their own words and getting ready to just respond, and they're not even hearing what you're saying. Different methods to learn how to change your voice tone. Because if your voice tone to him every single time you speak, it's coming in as, yes, you're being authoritative, you're being mean, etc. Same thing for the man. I would say, hey, show respect, because remember, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Khayrukum khayrukum li nisa." The best of you is the best to their wives. I'm just saying this directed at the women. Women, you got to respect the husband. But I'm also saying this to the man as well, and say, hey, the Prophet ﷺ told you to be the best of your akhlaq with your wife. You know how to be the best of your in business, at work, because you recognize that if you're the employee, okay, you recognize that you can lose a job. Well, losing a job, you can get another job. But if you lose your wife, you lose your whole family. If you manage to make a very good, let's call it pragmatic, let's call it a certain behavior to make it look very professional at work, well, then you can maintain your in a place that's even more important than work. Whether we're talking to the women or whether we're talking to the men, we have to learn how to maintain our own families in the best akhlaq, because this is the most sacred place that you are in. It's your family. It's your home. It's your wife. This is your companion. Same thing with the wife. Your husband is your companion. If you respect your boss and you respect that position so well, then you should definitely recognize that respecting your husband or him respecting you as well. Definitely it's a mutual thing. But here's one thing. It's so easy to say, well, you do that and I'll do this. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't change the situation, the circumstances that you're in until you change what is within yourself. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, if somebody loses their integrity, don't do the same. If somebody is perhaps addicted to saying bad words, you don't say the same. If somebody is so addicted to being, mean in their words, they just don't know how to say, you be the person to teach them how to use otherwise and how to be the person that lives the akhlaq, that lives the Islamic principles. You teach them what they're missing out on. So when you look at obeys him, that does not mean you lose your integrity, and it certainly does not mean you lose your honor, and it certainly does not mean that you lose your care. But certainly it basically is focused on structure. On structure, we need to make sure that we understand that that they're actually in a position that they'll be held accountable a lot more than you, even in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you were to see, even though the ayat were saying فَأَكَلَا مِنْهَا in regards to Adam and Hawa and Eve, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had emphasized that Adam repented, Adam did this. Why? Because he was holding him accountable way more than her. Even though, in the Quran, it said both of them ate from it. But the emphasis was on Adam because he was in charge. Even though the Bible basically does it differently, holds that Eve was basically sympathy to making Eve seduce Adam, and basically he eats from the tree, etc. But that's not the case in the Quran. The Quran is completely different. The Quran considers that no, Adam holds a higher responsibility than Eve. Okay. So just to clarify this one, and certainly the feminists made this word be correlated with caging, correlated with dishonor to the women, and basically a reason for her regression, a reason for why she's not getting into advanced. But Islam says no. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created your nature, and your room is right in the middle of you, because that's your center. Family, creating family, making family, you are centered around your body, and that social dynamic is really what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you for. So family is sacred to you, your womb is sacred to you, all your body. You'll be so surprised when you hear these experts telling you that even how your ovaries work, and how a lot of the different glands and all the different glands, even in your brain, they're connected to your ovaries. Even your brain connected to a lot of the different things in your body, and there's nothing that you can change about it. This is a reality. Even when you're talking about bone mass, you're talking about all the different things that basically the brain structure, all of that, the anatomy of your body is completely different. You are female from your DNA. You are female from your DNA, and all of that basically tells you that you function differently. That's the same thing. He functions differently. We're not asking you to become male, and certainly does, in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ وَالنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مُكْتَسَبٌ. When Salama just wondered, well, how come the privileges of going for jihad, going for Jum'ah, going for this, we don't get the same. So this ayah was revealed. للرجال نصيب ما اكتسبوا. Men, they've got certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them in terms of potentials, in terms of responsibilities, etc. وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نصيب ما اكتسبوا. Women have certain potentials and certain, let's call it these balances, were basically to create a balance within the society, to create a balance within the community. And therefore, recognizing this balance is extremely important to recognize how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to bring about a balance within the family, a structure within the family. And not to get influenced with all these different rhetorics that the feminists are spewing within our minds and thinking that we're trying to quote unquote free women, when in reality we're just making them free access to the predators on the street. Islam tells you, no, I don't want you to be free access. I want you to be of value. I want you to be of value, and I want any man that basically is wanting to get access to make sure that he really is a person of piety, a person of ability, a person of masculinity, a person that can really handle the value of you, your value. If he cannot handle your value, he's not worthy of being your husband. And that's why, in order to make sure that he's a person that understands your value, he needs to be a person of 1, 2, 3, 4 qualifications. Guess what? In fiqh, you don't see details on the qualifications of what a man should look for in a wife. They just said it, and I could just say it in just one line. Yeah, you just need to look for piety in a woman. But they were in so many details in regards to who qualifies for this woman. And they put on all these different lists, and you'll see once we talk about it. They put in all these lists. We're talking about education, job, culture, all these different things. That they went into all these different huge conversations and huge debates and all these different evidences just to discuss why. Because they regarded that women are of value, and that particular woman, not everybody is going to be matching her value. And therefore, because she is of value, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this gatekeeper in, which is the father right there, to basically say, well, wait a minute, the father, the brother, you can't get to my sister, you can't get to my daughter, not until I approve that you basically would match her value. So what is she? She's basically the treasure. She's the treasure. And this father or this brother is basically the one to be the guardhouse, and basically you don't come in, and then we'll look at your qualification. Okay. And if he looks at her, she pleases him. So, okay, what does that mean? She basically also takes in consideration appearance, because men definitely care about appearance. And as women, we recognize that they care about appearance, and women would put in all these different, cosmetics and pay for their appearance. Why? Because they recognize that men value appearance. She values basically how she appears, and men value appearance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in, to complete each other. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ basically said a pious wife, when her husband looks at her, she pleases him, and if he makes an oath, she fulfills it. Okay, when he makes an oath, like what kind of an oath? Like, let's say, Wallahi, you won't do this. I don't want you to do this. It's, in other words, he's basically determined. He's showing determination. I don't want you to do this. So we're not necessarily talking about an oath where he was named in this whole determination, meaning yameen, but it could also reflect that he's determined and asking her to not do something and being really determined that no, this isn't going to happen, but she can break it. And if he's absent from her, she protects herself. This isn't talking about protecting herself when he's away, to meaning, yeah, she's right there, doing martial arts and working on, her taekwondo or whatever it is to protect herself. This isn't talking about that. She protects herself. In other words, she doesn't put herself on display. Doesn't put herself on display, whether on social media, we talk about, on TikTok or whatever it is on social media, and just, displaying herself in any way, even if he consents to it. Of course, a woman is not a place of display. And of course, she's to protect herself from being a person that is of public property. And of course, she would protect his wealth because she basically, of course, he's the breadwinner, or at least expected to be the breadwinner, and she basically does not want his wealth. He probably doesn't know what's inside that cart because he's assuming that you know how to make that money management in order to not misspend and wander the money. Okay, let's see. Single, although most of his wives, the Prophet ﷺ, that is, most of his wives were not single, only Sayyidah Aisha was, but he still recommended that a man would marry a virgin. Okay, let me explain that one. What's a virgin? Is it a virgin man or a virgin woman? So a virgin, the Prophet ﷺ recommended that a woman would, or a man would marry a virgin woman, and he said, "Halla bikran tula'ibuha wa tula'ibuk." Tula'ibuha wa tula'ibuk, meaning that this is the Prophet ﷺ's recommendation that he would marry a woman that did not have a past marriage experiences, to basically tula'ibuha wa tula'ibuk. What comes with al-mula'ab? What does the word tula'ib? Tula'ib actually means to play with something. Okay, but it's not that you're playing with her to mean, she's a doll, but this is to basically refer that she doesn't have past traumas. She doesn't have past expectations, doesn't have all these past things. And then she's coming in to probably judge you in certain ways, or coming with a past trauma, etc. In other words, with al-mula'aba comes that, this person is empty of a lot of anxiety, because certainly with divorce comes a lot of anxiety. With divorce comes a lot of preconceived images, a lot of these different things. In other words, it basically adds on to, let's call it, the ingredients that make this as something that you really have to look into to make sure that it doesn't add on to the obstacles. Okay, that's basically a recommendation. Is that the same for a woman? There isn't a hadith that necessarily recommended that women would marry single men, but certainly we do see that single men were definitely preferred, but it was more of a cultural thing. But in terms of their preferences at the time, I will say cultural preferences, because there isn't a single hadith that basically said, hey, don't get married to somebody that is married before, because they were in a completely different dynamic. Money meant a lot. Progeny and culture and family meant a lot as well, because they were seeing it as, well, this is protection. Remember, they were living in a society that is rather a very, let's call it, oriented around power, in not only money, but social status meant a lot, and that was their place of power. So they were still living within that society. And certainly not that it doesn't mean the same in our times, but I will say the dynamic is a little different. And would I recommend still, as my own personal preference, for women to not marry a man that is married? The answer is absolutely. My recommendation, do not marry a man that is already married. Here's why. A number of different reasons. When you look at the ayah, pause for a second here, because I know somebody is already right now trying to take a deep breath. Wait a minute, are you going against the Quran? No, I'm not going against the Quran. But when you look at the ayat, when it says فَإِن لَمْ تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا, yes, the ayah says فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. Really clear. There's no doubt about that. Is it preferred for you? Well, it's preferred for him. مَا طَابَ لَكُم. He said, if that's what you desire, you want to be married 2 women, 3 women, 4 women, go ahead. That's what you desire. Is that necessarily in your favor? Well, it depends on your circumstance. Okay. It depends on your circumstance, whether polygamy is the right thing for you or not, depends on your circumstance. But what I would recommend, just like this hadith, هَلَّا بِكْرًا تُلَاعِبُهَا وَتُلَاعِبُكَ, I would say the same thing, that if a man had a marriage experience before, he will come with a number of also preconceived images, with a number of different probably things that will trigger, let's say, sentiments of the past, or probably the previous wife was probably and had an attitude, and then he'll think that, oh, it's the same attitude again, and start to do the same thing. Just like she might actually do the same and think that, oh, okay, this is an attitude. It triggered something. It's a flashback, etc. Same thing that he will have. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is that when you continue the ayah, it basically said فَإِن لَمْ تَعْدِلُوا. It didn't say فَإِن لَمْ تَفْرَحُوا. فَإِن لَمْ يُعْجِبْكُمْ. It didn't say if you don't like it, or if you don't find it amusing. No, it said فَإِن لَمْ تَعْدِلُوا. Why the word تَعْدِلُوا? Because the word تَعْدِلُوا is letting us know that polygamous marriages are more likely to have abuse, oppression, drama, things go wrong, and lead to injustice. That's what this ayah is basically letting us know. That injustice is more likely to happen in polygamous marriages than in monogamous marriages. That's why it said فَإِن لَمْ تَعْدِلُوا. Why and how does this happen? Well, anyways, in a marriage, you're supposed to be fulfilling the deen, you're supposed to be fulfilling the nafs, the life, fulfilling the mind and mental health for everybody, the children, the husband, the wife, etc. And it's hard in a monogamous marriage. Well, how would you expect if it's a 2 women? And believe it or not, 3 women is even easier to control than 2. Okay. At least control in terms of the jealousy and all of that, but definitely needs a lot of money. Okay. And it's all on him. But I would always recommend to recognize these, let's call them obstacles, and let's also recognize that these come with this package of polygamy. It basically is part of it. You can't separate it from it, but you can probably reduce the amount of jealousy, reduce the friction, reduce, just different things, but to eliminate it completely, absolutely impossible. Eliminate it completely. Yeah, you probably want to think in a utopian way and co-wives and we're all together, etc. But no, that didn't exist in the household of the Prophet ﷺ. Sorry, it's not going to exist in another place either. Even the Prophet ﷺ's wives were not living this type of utopia where there was no jealousy, where they were just co-wives, everybody is just so happily ever after. No, they had some frictions, they had some disagreements, they had some issues, and they that you could read Surah al-Tahrim and the tafsir of that and figure that out. So that wasn't the case in the Prophet ﷺ's household. Well, certainly you're not going to find it in I don't know, Mr. Abdullah's household either. Okay. Okay, let's go for the other one. And of course, Jabir ibn Abdullah, even though the Prophet ﷺ said Halla Bikran, but Jabir ibn Abdullah replied, why he didn't want a single woman / virgin. And he had mentioned that he had younger sisters, and he wanted a woman that is older in order to take care of the younger sisters. In other words, he didn't want a younger woman that ends up really being, like the same age as his sisters and end up getting into all these disputes and all these disagreements. But he wanted someone to be like a mother to his younger sisters. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ actually said and gave that endorsement and made the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bless his marriage. Okay, the other thing is fertile. What do we mean by fertile? That basically is capable of conceiving. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ said, تزوجوا الودود الولود فإني مكاثر بكم الأمم يوم القيامة. The Prophet ﷺ said, marry the kind and fertile women, for I will be proud of your numbers on Judgment Day. So what does that mean when he said fertile? In other words, capable of conceiving. Okay, what does that mean? What do you mean capable of conceiving? How do we know if she's capable of conceiving? So you could say in certain families, maybe perhaps PCOs. I mean, doesn't mean if somebody has a PCO that they're not going to be fertile, but you're looking at certain illnesses that they might actually have, and the chances of conceiving probably makes it hard unless you use IVF, etc. So the Prophet ﷺ is basically recommending that the husband would choose, or the man would choose, a woman that is capable of conceiving. And that's the same thing even for a woman, to also choose a man that is capable of conceiving. So if we're talking about perhaps had a history or probably did, I don't know, vasectomy or something like that, then, the Prophet ﷺ is advising against that, and basically letting us know that one of the objectives of marriage is basically to conceive and to make families, and that when we say an objective of marriage, we're also talking about one of things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within your nature, to basically have children, to grow family, and that's part of what will bring about stability in you as well, because it is part of your nature. So that's not necessarily just for women, even though the hadith is directed at women, but the same inference would also be given to men, meaning, yes, it's directed at men, but it's the same that goes for women as well. Okay, let's continue with the other slide. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, we're going to get to the part about seeing the girl the man wanting to propose to. I know I translate, that's a typo right there, but just pretend you can't see it. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, let's see, the Prophet ﷺ basically tells that Sahabi, and Shu'bah ibn al-Mughira is his name. Shu'bah ibn al-Mughira, just to let you know, was a polygamous person. Okay. But he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and tells him that he had, and by the way, just speaking of polygamy, the society was very polygamous during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Why were they polygamous? Number one is it was a polygamous society because it was seen as, hey, this is creating family. Once you create family, that is a way of, one, bringing in more labor, meaning kids working, adding on to the energy basically that you would use in terms of work and getting a job, etc. That would add on to the money that as a family we basically have. And certainly, especially boys, when they start working, they start making money, they start giving their parents, they start taking care of their parents. In other words, that becomes prospected empowerment, and that why, they would marry more than one if they had the money to, because to them, making family was a way of creating an investment. It's an investment. What are you investing in? Well, I'm investing in making more kids. So at the same time, yes, there was also, a desire as well. So it's not only to that, there was a desire as well. And by the way, I come from a very polygamous city. It's called Al-Khalil. That's originally where I come from. And not to mention that recently I learned that polygamy, or let's say polygamous men, and is actually genetics. So yeah. It's genetics. I didn't know that until recently, that it is basically found in mammals, polygamous mammals, and polygamous mammals, that they actually found the gene for it. This is really astonishing for me. I think it's 15 uncles. Okay. And let me see, I think 8 of them, I can't remember, but I think 8 of them are actually polygamous. Okay. And I come from a polygamous city, and it's called, like I said, Al-Khalil. And yes, my father is married to 2. So yeah, and if he wanted, I'm sure he actually told me he was interested in getting married to the third. I hope my mom doesn't hear this, but all right. I mean, it's not like it's a secret, right? Okay, now I'm running away. All right. Now to get to this hadith. All right, the Prophet basically tells him, أَنَظَرْتَ إِلَيْهَا. Did you see her? He says, no. And then the Prophet said, فَاذْهَبْ فَانْظُرْ إِلَيْهَا فَإِنَّهُ أَحْرَى أَنْ يُؤْدَمَ بَيْنَكُمَا. In one narration, in this narration, فَإِنَّ فِي أَعْيُنِ الْأَنصَارِ شَيْئًا. Go and say her, for there is something in the eyes of al-Ansar. Wait, what do you mean there's something? Like a certain illness? No. He's basically saying that, they have their way of seeing things, they have their preferences, and he told him to go see her. But here's the question. When he told him to go see her, did he specify how much? No, he didn't. He didn't specify how much to say. Without hijab, with hijab, just the face and the hands, what are we looking at? Let's see another hadith. We're going to get there, okay? Jabir ibn Abdullah, he said, خطبت جارية من بني سلم. What is a jariya? A jariya means girl, okay? He basically got engaged and proposed for someone from the tribe of Bani Salama, and he said, فكنت أتخبأ لها حتى رأيت منها بعض ما دعاني إلى نكاحي. I said I used to hide in order to see what would provoke me to basically getting married to her. In other words, what was it? In other words, what did he see? Why was he hiding? So he was basically trying to sneak peek to what he can see, whatever. Was it her face? Was it her skin color? What really was it? But he was, just trying to sneak peek to be able to see anything of what will basically get him to know whether she's the right person for him. Okay, wait a minute. This is hadith, authentic too. What was narrated by Ahmad and Abi Dawood. We're going to get there. Okay, let's look at this one. Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Oh, in that narration here, فَذْهَبْ فَانْظُرْ إِلَيْهِ فَإِنَّ فِي أَعْيُنِ الْأَنصَارِ شَيْئًا. And the other narration is انظر إليها فإنه أحرى أن يؤدم بينكما. What is يؤدم بينكما? يؤدم is from المودة. فإنه أحرى أن يؤدم بينكما. What is يؤدم? يؤدم actually means, it comes from the same root as المودة. So 5 minutes. فإنه أحرى أن يؤدم بينكما, that it will bring a relationship, it will bring love, it will bring affection, it will bring the relationship that will create a bond. That's what basically it means. In other words, there's more to seeing than just the appearance of a person, that it creates a communication. That's basically what it's saying, that it creates a communication just by looking at somebody. Yes, you're probably interested, you're seeing, in other words, eyes speak, and certainly those eyes, they send messages to the brain and how we feel about each other. All it needs is doing this scan, just look at the person, whether you're looking at their face, you're looking at their body, etc. It basically is built in, let's call it that way. It's built in information. And there was this interesting study that was actually telling us about body features, and just the body features, and certain body features, they're more liked, whether on men or women. So, for example, you're looking at a body feature, what we would call a pear shape, okay, for women, for example, and they would say, well, guess what? The pear shape, she basically is more fertile than somebody else. And this is what would basically be liked, and this is why they like it. And then they'll relate it to fertility and all of that. And for women, it's basically being muscle and the muscle mass that basically creates a higher level and a higher level of being healthy. And if you are healthy, you are more likely to be fertile. If you're healthy, you're more likely to be fertile. So certainly, for women, for example, they don't want obese men, and certainly women don't want, women don't want obese men, and men don't want obese women, for example. Why? Because with obesity comes infertility, comes a lot of different body and certainly a lot of different health issues. And we're not just talking about obesity, but we're just talking about what our feature says about us. Okay, so when you look at فَإِنَّهُ أَحْرَى أَنْ يُؤْدَمَ بَيْنَكُمَا, certainly we have built in scans to a certain level that is capable of seeing and analyzing whether this person is healthy, not healthy, is strong, is not strong, this person is fertile, not fertile. Although I know somebody can look like a macho man and a woman can look, the most attractive woman, etc., but not necessarily be the fertile woman or be the woman that's capable of conceiving or the man that's capable of conceiving. We know that, okay? But I'm here just trying to understand فَإِنَّهُ أَحْرَى أَنْ يُؤْدَمَ بَيْنَكُمَا, that it carries within it that we have built in x-rays, we have built in scans, and that by looking at certain features, you could see statistics tell us that there are certain features that are more desirable to women or to men. There are certain features that are more desirable to men, certain features more desirable to women, and you could say, yes, they still vary, but there are certain features that you would say, yes, people would agree that this person is beautiful, this person is attractive, this person is looking strong, this person looks fit, this person looks, hey, they could be Hollywood stars or whatever it is. They pretty much agree. Why would they agree? What makes them agree? Why do we, even though this is something that is rather relevant, okay, relative, something that is rather relative, but how is it that to a certain point, even on things that are relative, we could still agree to a certain extent by 60%, 70%. That's a very large number, and agree that this feature is desirable by many men or desirable by many women, or etc. Why do they agree? What is it related to? All of that. In the end, the Prophet ﷺ is letting us know that appearance and looking at somebody, it may click with person A, but not click with person B. But it's important to have that first sight or glance or look. It doesn't have to be first, second, third, etc. In other words, this is important. Okay, let's see. A woman came to the Prophet ﷺ. Listen, this one's rather weird and ironic. Let's look at it. Okay, so she came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, "Ji'tu li ahaba laka nafsi." boom. She said, came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, I'm here gifting myself to you. Gifting? What do you mean by gifting? Well, that was another way of saying, I'm here basically proposing to you. And who was there? It was all these Sahaba sitting in this circle. And they said, فَنَظَرَ إِلَيْهَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم فَصَعَّدَ النَّظَرَ إِلَيْهَا وَصَوَّبَهُ ثُمَّ طَأْطَأَ رَأْسَهُ. I want you to look at the wording, the exact wording. The Prophet ﷺ looked at her. Well, he didn't just look. فَصَعَّدَ. When you say صَعَّدَ, the word صَعَّدَ means to look up. But صَعَّدَ means to fully scrutinize. He was looking really closely at her. وَصَوَّبَهُ. In other words, he was really wanting to look at a certain feature. He was really looking for certain features of attraction, certain features of interest. In other words, he was looking for something particular. Okay. And that's what they noticed. It was like he was really looking and really having a good gaze. But then after he was done with that gaze, ثُمَّ طَأْطَأَ رَأْسَهُ. Then he lowered his head. And then when the woman sensed, فَلَمَّا رَأَتِ الْمَرْأَةُ أَنَّهُ لَمْ يَقْضِ فِيهَا شَيْئًا جَلَسَتْ. When the woman saw that he did not make a final answer, and that he didn't literally say he wasn't interested, but then he just stayed silent. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, or just stayed silent. You come forward, basically proposing to me. Proposing to me, and here's a response, and he just lowered his head. Well, that isn't until another Sahabi comes up, and he basically says, can I get married to her? And then the Prophet ﷺ basically tells him, well, do you have the mahr to pay? And then he said, well, I only have my garment, my cloak. And he said, no, don't want your garment, because if you take it off, then you're going to be naked. I want you to get me something, even if that was a ring made of iron. Okay. Even if that was a ring made of iron. And then he goes, and in another narration is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he asked him what he had, another narration that he basically said, well, I only know the Quran. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells him, well, I got her married to you with what you had memorized from the Quran. Anyhow, so what I want you to look at here is that the Prophet ﷺ, how much did he look at this woman? She is amongst all these Sahaba. So was it the face? Was it, when, even if you're wearing a hijab, there are certain features you could see even through the hijab to really know about this person's appearance. But here's the thing. When you look at these ahadith, they didn't really give us a direct border of how much for the man to see. In other words, how much can the woman uncover in front of this man? They did have differences of opinions on whether it's liked that he would see her, whether it's a sunnah, whether it's haram, whether it's permissible. They had different opinions on what is because the hadith basically had said, in a way, when it said, فَانظُرْ إِلَيْهَا, is this an imperative verb telling him, well, go see her? Or is this taking it to a level of, well, it's like that you would do that? Or was this telling him, no, that's an order. You really got to go see her in order to make sure that she's basically in your place of interest. And rather than say, oh, she is actually ugly, I didn't think she was like that. No, go do so right now, and that way you won't harm the lady's feelings. That's why they basically had differences of opinions. Is it liked? Is it sunnah? Is it haram? Is it permissible? Okay. And the preponderant, I'll make the story short, is that it is permissible for him and her to see each other. Is there a limited number of times? There isn't a limit. And I know certain cultures that they would think that there's a certain limit, that it's just once. That's basically it, just for 5 minutes, just for 20 minutes. There isn't a limit to the amount of time. neither is there a limit to the number of times. As long as they're still trying to discuss, and what to discuss, we'll talk about that later. What should they discuss? What should they be talking about? What is the conversation looking like? I'll talk about that later. We're right now just talking about the beginning of it. Okay, so it's permissible. Can she also see him the same way? Well, yes, she can also get a good glance and get a good, conversation eye to eye, and actually see, is this person, am I interested in this person? Is he good looking? Or is he basically clicking to what I'm looking for? Same thing for her to basically appear. And we'll talk about, can she beautify herself? We'll talk about that in just a bit. Okay, so if they do not see each other, okay, would the marriage still be valid? Yes, the marriage is still valid. Let's say they don't see each other and the father basically gives the consent, and she's still in her niqab and insisted that she wanted to be in her niqab. He didn't see really anything. And he just knows he's married to Safiya, the daughter of, I don't know, Wa'il, and they didn't even see each other. And she doesn't even know what he looks like. All right, can that happen? Yes, in certain cultures, this still does happen. In certain cultures, like in rural areas in the Gulf countries, Yemen, until now, this is something that actually happens. And I'm sure same thing in India, Bangladesh, believe it or not, these things can happen. I've seen cases where the woman had no clue what the man looked like, and she basically was wed to this person. She had no clue. He had no clue what she looked like, and she had no clue what he looked like. But here you could see that the hadith were telling you that no, a glance is important to build in a certain psychological clicking, a certain connection, a certain bond in order to make this a successful relationship. In other words, those moments, don't oversee them as trivial and not important, but they actually have a direct relationship in how they can make this marriage successful or not. Okay, how much can he see from her is the question. Okay, I mean, if we know that generally he is considered an ajnabi anha, what does that mean? An ajnabi does not mean a foreigner, meaning from a different country. Ajnabi basically means that he's not a mahram. Okay, he's not a mahram. So how can he see from this woman that he's proposing to? Is it normally what appears in front of her mahrams as face, hands, neck, probably legs as well? So, wearing basically the way that she would dress at home? Or is it just the hands and the face? In other words, you're taking off your niqab, taking off your gloves? Or is it the body, except the private parts, which is totally not acceptable from the rulings of Sharia? But I recognize that Ibn Hazm said that. I hesitated to actually mention that, but I wanted to mention it because right now with AI, you're seeing people, get a lot of information out there. And then this becomes sometimes, I would say, lacking the wisdom and lacking the ilm in Islam to really know how to put this within a context. So I'm going to explain it. Okay, so the first opinion, what normally appears in front of the mahram, this was the Hanbali opinion. And what was their defense? I think I do mention the evidences. Hold on, let me see. Okay, yeah, I do mention the evidences. So what is the evidence? The generalization in the hadith, okay, the generalization in the hadith, they don't necessarily specify how much the man can see from the woman. He just said فانظر إليها. So didn't give us a certain amount, whether it's the face, the hands, probably legs, and etc. Didn't necessarily use a specific term, so therefore it was more general. Yet it needs to be noted, okay, that just because yes, we see this as a considerable opinion in the Hanbali madhab, I don't want, especially during the times when people lost their religious integrity. So this man comes up to ask for her hand, And here she is, wearing a skirt that she would wear probably in front of her brothers, perhaps, and, with probably maybe she would dress in front of her brothers, maybe a t-shirt with her hair all, fixed and all of that, and then appear in front of this man that she had never seen before. Okay. Before you would go for that step, I would first recommend, especially during our times when men had lost their religious integrity and we had seen people just really pretend that they're going to just propose, but in reality, they don't even understand their positions. They don't even understand how important a woman's hijab is and how important her reputation is. So it's important that you guard your hijab. And once you approve his looks, you approve his deen, your mahram, your wali, basically approves him. Let's consider it like it's different sessions and different stages. Stage one, your wali. Did he approve him? Did you guys ask about him? Did you do a background check? And there's an initial background check and there's a thorough background check. The initial background check, yes, yeah, this person works at this place, this person prays in this masjid, this person generally healthy, this, there's a general approved thing. We kind of asked 2-3 people about him. They said he was, cleared, but then, okay, then bring him over. That's the first time, before you take off your hijab, I would say, let your wali clear the first initial background check. Then stage 2, maybe come over, stay with your hijab. You do the second clear check. You're like, okay, I could say, he's okay looking. All right, I think I'm interested in this. Okay, then we can go for probably stage 3 and say, well, I'd like to perhaps maybe do a physical exam, or I would, let's say you wanted to take the opinion of take off your hijab. That's a considerable opinion, okay? A considerable opinion for the Hanbali madhab. For the other madhab, they considered that, no, this is going way too far. Especially the Maliki, they regarded that, no, you're just going to let your face appear and your hands. And if he needs further information, he can probably send his mother or send another lady to say, well, she's got coarse hair, she's got long brown hair, she's got this, this type of perhaps maybe features. And it's quite interesting that it was, oh my God, this is so weird to say. Okay, it was something that they used to do. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ even recommended it, okay, and told the lady that was going to propose for another lady, and he told her to smell whether she had a bad breath, to smell underneath her arms, to basically also, just get some information about basically her, of course, dental health, gut health, because when you speak about mouth and breath, you're talking about gut health. You're speaking about underarms. That tells you a lot about gut health, and that tells you a lot about different things. But anyhow, but that was also how they practiced it. Believe it or not, yeah, I'm 46, but I've had women come to ask for the hand and literally did that to me. Man, oh my God, that was so weird. That was so uncomfortable. And it was just so astonishing that it was still being done during our times. Again, it was something that they found it acceptable, and certainly. So anyhow, the women can go and describe, according to the Malikis, they're like, no need for this woman take off her hijab more than the face and the hands, because the face and the hands can tell you a lot about the person, and tell you a lot about Of course, even if she's in her hijab, doesn't have to be, the kind of strict hijab that you would wear in public, but they considered that, it's enough to show the face and the hands because that's basically the area of beauty. You would know her features, you would basically get to know certain details. And if you needed to know more, you would basically get your relative, your female relative, in order to give you more information about perhaps, certain, let's call it features or certain smell or certain anything of that sort. The last one, which is the body except the private part, that was the Ibn Hazm. And that one was pretty ironic. He really exceeded the limit. Okay, sorry, Ibn Hazm, absolutely, give a lot of honor for Ibn Hazm. But for this one, no other scholar approved this opinion whatsoever, despite the generalization in the hadith, but no other scholar approved this. And that definitely is as a min shududat al-fuqaha. Let me talk about shududat al-fuqaha for a second. So what is a shudud? A shudud is basically an aberration, okay? An aberration. So yes, sometimes even if he's a scholar of fiqh, there can be certain aberrations. Okay, when would you call something an aberration? You would call an aberration if it contradicts a text or if it contradicts maqasid al-sharia. What are maqasid al-sharia? Legal maxims. Imagine if we are going to say, yes, it's totally acceptable to basically look at a woman except her private parts for khutbah. Imagine we're going to say that. You know what that means? That means if you're basically going to exceed such limits, that goes and contradicts maqasid al-sharia, because part of maqasid al-sharia is hifz al-irb, is the preservation of private parts, is preservation. We're not talking about private parts, meaning the front and the back. No, we're talking about even the modesty of people. Okay, that's part of the private. And a woman's private area is more than just what is called al-awra al-mughalladha, because a woman is all awra. The Prophet ﷺ said, al-mar'atu awra. The Prophet ﷺ literally said, a woman is awra. All of the woman is awra. So if all of the woman is awra, then in that situation, to somehow think that, yeah, I'm actually wanting to propose and all of that. And that's why the Malikis, they regarded that, no, we can't have it acceptable, because the Shafi'is, they basically said, even if it's without her consent. So what does that mean? Yeah, she was basically, I don't know, making in the masjid doing wudu, and she was taking off her hijab, and this guy basically sneaked in the place that they were making wudu in order to see her. All right. And he said, well, I'm here just trying to see if she's the right woman for me. Oh, and he said, well, I knew there was no one else that came in, so I just wanted to do that. No, Maliki said, absolutely not. Why not? They said, because if we are going to allow that, then many guys with bad intentions are going to be going into perhaps maybe a place of mutawadda, or probably public areas, or probably fitness or clubs or whatever it is. And of course, they didn't say fitness clubs because they didn't have that, but a mem or whatever. All right. Or even probably sneak on what people's doors and all of that, and throughout people's windows, and claim that I'm actually just trying to get engaged and I'm trying to see if she's the right woman for me. And for the Malikis, they really had a point, and they said, you know what, if we're going to allow that, then we're going to just let people's borders in people's houses be an easy access to people of ill intentions, and there could easily get out away from it and out of this whole accusation by saying, I'm trying to get engaged and I'm trying to see if she's fit for me. They said, absolutely not. This is a legal maxim right there. We need to make sure that people's homes, that people's a'rad, that people's chastity is to be preserved. This is a legal maxim. This is a legal maxim, and we cannot allow people coming in and giving themselves the justification to trespass their limit under the pretense that they're basically trying to get engaged. or they're trying to see a good look, hey, you can come in and to say without consent, if it was possible without consent, she was basically available. Let's say she's walking down the street or something and you basically saw her. You don't have to, hey, can I look at you while she's walking down the street? You can go ahead and see, because anyways, that's how she's appearing in public. And with the intention of seeking the engagement. All right, then that's a different situation. But if we're talking about, without her consent and sneaking into people's doors and people's homes and in people's private spaces, even if it's in a public space, then like perhaps maybe a place of fitness, or probably maybe a place of wudu or something like that. Well, that's still considered a private space for women. Shouldn't expect that. All right. So just wanted to note that. But of course, it must be noted that if it is of high importance, the family and the sister make sure of this man's piety and his interest, and that he's being serious about this and not making just a way or even like a pretense to get married, and then he's just wanting to see these girls left and right and basically just playing games. So before you take off your hijab, just make sure of that one. Does she have to know? Like we said, that area of debate between the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, etc., from the manners and respecting privacies, that he should get the permission to see her from her family. Yet many scholars do say that he may see her without her permission, which does not mean that one unreveals people's privacies. Okay, other scholars, like I said, the Shafi'i, they did recommend that he would see her without her knowledge to not break her feelings. That was the Shafi'i's defense. The Shafi'i's defense was, if he sees her without her knowledge, that way he won't break her feelings, etc. But then, we are more concerned about trespassing and people using that as a pretense to get away with a lot of those limits that they were supposed to be preserving, whether for the individuals or the public. And of course, just wanting to mention that one. So let's look at this one. The Malikis hated that men would see women without their guardian's consent, since that might give the ill-mannered people take advantage of bashful women. Can they get to see more than once? So he saw her once and he's like, you know what? I'm not sure I remember what she really looked like. So the hadiths do not limit the number of citations, but leave it open till one makes a final decision. Okay, if a man and a woman are only engaged, they're totally considered as not married and complete strangers, because the Prophet ﷺ said, any man alone with a woman, the third will be their shaitan. This isn't talking about husband and wife, okay? But this is talking about they're not married. This is talking about people that are not mahram. In other words, being ajnabi together. Okay. So let me see the other questions. When do they see each other? But what time is it? It is 12:06 my time. So here's what we're going to talk about next week. Inshallah, let's look into this. When do they see each other? Let me look at the other slides. And what if one is not interested? And can someone look at his? What else are we talking about? Hold on. I'm going to be talking about. Hold on, let me see. How much can he see? Well, we talked about this piece of it. What if they're not interested? And you know what? There's another thing that I want you to look at, and I think it's this one. I want you to see it. Hold on. Let me just make sure I share the slide so you can see what we're talking about. We're going to talk about the definition of engagement. We're going to talk about, let's see, can a woman propose to a man? Yeah, she's now asking for his hand in marriage. Is that okay? Is that permissible? What is the ruling on that? Is it permissible to beautify a woman, like she's putting on makeup, or probably dressing up, probably dressing up in a certain way to basically bring attraction? Is that permissible? or probably wearing jewelry, or maybe putting eye lenses, or maybe, I don't know, fillers. Is that permissible? What is the ruling on that? So that's what we're going to talk about next week, because I know that many people have questions in that regards. Let's see. What if this isn't expectable in your culture to see women, especially without hijab? So if it's not within your culture, they don't accept it. I know you're saying acceptable. If it's not acceptable within your culture, I guess that's not the madhab within your culture. I would say still that there is another opinion. Okay. So I would still say that does not make it haram per se. No, it's not haram. The opinion still stays valid. Okay. Would I necessarily jump to that opinion? Say, hey, take that other opinion and jump onto it? I would say, before you go against the madhab / culture within your community and say, yeah, there's a different madhab, etc., I would take in consideration that people perceive that other as khawarim al-muru'ah, as not acceptable, as something that is at least aib, or something that is not right. So I wouldn't go against the culture and the madhab within that culture, because not many people know the science within that madhab, and the science of the evidences and all of that. So they end up basically confusing those lines, and you might bring in defamation to yourself. You don't want to ruin your reputation and people accusing you of having bad akhlaq. So I'm just talking about in general, when there's a certain madhab in a certain culture, don't go against it and say, well, there are different opinions and all of that. Most people don't know the science of fiqh to really know the evidences. You're just bringing in lots of defamation to yourself. If you needed to, and if you really disagreed with another opinion, or with a certain opinion within your own cultural madhab, I would say don't make that public, because you don't want to create a scene. So you do it on your own. There's a way to do it on your own, and this is personal. Okay, so we'll end right here. If there are any questions before we sign off, and inshallah, you would like to unmute yourself, that's okay too. No one wants to unmute themselves. All right. So what we'll do, let me just, okay, here we go. She is saying, I have some questions, but not related to the topic. Can a woman perform prayer with her hair tied up in a bun or not, like a hair roll? Yes, dear, there's nothing haram with that. Is such a hairstyle generally allowed? I mean, yes, if it's not in public. If it's not in public, even if it's under hijab, okay, if it's not in public, generally it's allowed. Is it permissible for a woman to remove facial or bodily hair? Yes, dear, it is permissible to remove facial hair and bodily hair. It's permissible, but then scholars, I'll make the story short, scholars had differences of opinions on, some had actually differentiated between a woman that's doing it for her husband and a woman that is not doing it for her husband. So they differentiated between a woman that is a virgin and a woman that's not a virgin. And they considered that would be permissible for a woman doing it for her husband. But if she's not married, then why are you doing it? But really, is there any evidence? The answer is no. But in general, yes, it is permissible to remove the bodily hair. But of course, some bodily hair is recommended. In fact, it's like, for example, pubic hair, that hair is, it's obligatory to not leave it past 40 days. And it doesn't mean to wax it. In fact, waxing is not recommended. What is recommended is trimming, okay? As for using things like shavers, etc., when the scholars had some hated using shavers, they thought that that brings more hair, but with studies we know that that doesn't make hair. It just basically cuts the hair in the middle, and therefore it appears as if it was thicker. Okay, so yes, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to use waxing, they used to use tweezing, they used to use shaving, they used to use different methods, or sometimes even certain herbs. They used to use certain herbs to remove bodily hair as well. So that's permissible. The facial hair, the differences of opinions between scholars on the facial hair, like al-Badri said, don't remove any facial hair, but majority of the scholars, they said our issue is just the eyebrow hair, and that was their main issue, and the biggest disagreement was on that, but not mustache and let's say beard. If a woman grows, majority of the scholars actually said that that is permissible, whether not married or whether married, majority of the scholars. So like I said, let's say removing hair from face, upper lips, arms, etc., legs, yes, that is permissible. Can a married woman, an unmarried woman, wear makeup? Okay, now that's a lot of questions. Okay. Can she wear makeup if it's in public? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ, that they should not reveal their beautification. And Ibn Atiyah, he basically explained zinatahun, this is talking about an acquired beautification. So putting on, let's say, makeup, or putting on foundation, or I don't know, mascara, or any type of, let's say, things that you would buy from the cosmetics department. Well, that tells you that this type is beautification, and therefore to wear makeup, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ, they should not reveal their beautification. And إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا, and that's that area of debate. Inshallah, we'll talk about that more, but I'm just making the story short and just going further upon it. Can a man look at a non-mahram man? Can a woman, look at a non-mahram man? If it is a gaze of lust, the answer is absolutely not. If it is a gaze of non-lustful gaze, so let's say it's a professor, I don't know, teaching, and she's just looking at him as he's describing, let's say, this, I don't know, math problem that he's teaching, whatever it is, then that's permissible. There are different gazes, and every single gaze basically has its own intention and where it's going. Okay, so a non-lustful gaze, that would be permissible. I'm asking about a question. It's a non-lustful gaze, it's just for communication, that's permissible. What is the general principle regarding removing or keeping natural bodily hair? Is it considered altering Allah's creation, or cleansing or adornment? Fair enough. Removing underarm pin, removing the hair from the underarm, and that the sunnah. The sunnah to remove the underarm hair, sorry about that, is to completely pluck. In other words, to completely remove and not shave. The sunnah in the pubic hair is to trim. The details, the other, like legs, arms, okay, that's more for beautification, and that's related to culture, and that's for your preference, and not necessarily anything that Islam regarded as like, dislike, that's not changing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. She says, if a virgin removes permissible hair and put makeup, just because in Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal, and is within boundary. No, that's إن الله جميل يحب الجمال. We can use that as to put in fillers and to put in all that and you know all of that. No, that's not. إن الله جميل يحب الجمال. Okay. إن الله جميل يحب الجمال. This is a general text. You can't use that as a way. إن الله جميل يحب الجمال. I'm making, you know, basically my hair and dressing up and all of that and appearing in public. No, that's using the text that is in the wrong the wrong context, and certainly leaving out other texts. The other text would tell me that a woman should not appear in public because should not appear in public with her beautification. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ. Are we going to take the hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ جَمِيلٌ يُحِبُّ الْجَمَالِ, and not take the ayah, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ? Absolutely not. The ayah says they should not reveal their beautification, whether that was acquired beautification or whether that was her own built-in natural beauty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ. Okay, if it's if it's not in public and she wants to put it at home, that's okay. That's okay. I just would say be careful from putting makeup at home too much, because it will close your pores, and you gotta be careful with how you use makeup. Yeah, it's told that they'll make you look more beautiful, but trust me, it will kill your pores. It will basically it will bring in aging into your skin. So you got to be really careful. Makeup basically does make you age. You'll be 30 years old and you would look like 40 already because of all that makeup. So I would be really careful with the amount of makeup that you're using. So just keep that one in mind. I'll leave that to you and how you want to use it. If it's not in public, it's not in front of non-mahram men, that's permissible. That's okay. All right. So this is it. Inshallah, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. I wish you had asked these questions. Oh, we are recording. Okay. All right. So good job. Okay. So I didn't know that we were recording. So, okay. I basically answered the questions in short because of time. Okay. But there